to see my country being influenced by the Judeo-Christian ethics, the morals, and the values that we can set our course ahead so that our country can become a major contributor for foreign missions.
Welcome to this week's edition of First Person. I'm Wayne Shepherd. Today you'll meet a young man who's dedicating his life to the ministry of operating a Christian radio station in Mongolia. I'll introduce our guest in just a moment. It's great to have you with us today and each week as we meet people whose lives have first been redeemed and changed by the Lord, and secondly, have been dedicated to some unique task in building His kingdom. We've been on the air several years now, and each and every interview has been stored online, so you have an opportunity to listen anytime. Check out the audio files and even download them as a podcast to take with you on the go this summer. You'll find us online at firstpersoninterview.com, where you can listen to these shows, or you can download the podcast version through iTunes. firstpersoninterview.com. I've highlighted before some of the ministries of the Far East Broadcasting Company in several places around the world, but there are so many stories to tell that we're taking you to a new country today, Mongolia. Recently, at a conference in California, I sat down with the manager of the station, known as Radio Wind in the capital city. Now, we call him Bat, but his name is really Batjargal Tuvshintengel, a name that rolls off his tongue far more easily.
Well, my full name is Batjargal Tuvshintengel.
And you're from Mongolia.
I am from Mongolia.
You are the director of the Far East Broadcasting Company, Mongolia.
That's correct.
And I'm
yes.
guessing most people don't even know that there is ministry in Mongolia, let alone a radio ministry. So we want to talk about that. Tell me about your country.
Well, Mongolia has a very fascinating history, as early as dates back to 13th century. It's very much connected with the great king, Genghis Khan. Uh-huh. Well, actually, you kind of pronounce him Genghis Khan. We actually pronounce him Genghis Khan.
We just had a huge historical exhibit in Chicago not too many months ago about...
Oh, is that? Okay,
well,
that's good to know.
Yeah.
Actually, he was the one who founded the great Mongol Empire back in the 13th century. And, of course, he actually had a great vision of taking over the whole world on a horseback, and I believe he failed. He only took half of it.
Oh, yeah, merely half the world.
Yes. So basically, his son Kublai Khan was actually his grandson, and he established the Mongol Empire, and then he actually installed Beijing as the capital city of Mongolia at that time.
And how many people live in Mongolia today?
We have a population of just a little less than 3 million Mongolians.
Spread out over a very large area.
Very vast land, 1.5 times as big as the state of Texas. So,
wow. And you have one major city.
We have one major city called Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital city. It has about 1.2 million people.
And we'll talk about that's where you live.
That's right. That's where I live.
Where the ministry takes place, which we'll talk about. But give me a sense of the Mongolian people and your love for your country and its people.
Traditionally, Mongolians are nomadic herdsmen. We have 40 million animals in Mongolia. We are actually known to be very good horsemen because that's very much related to our culture and nomadic tradition. Mongolians basically started out becoming, shamanists to begin with, as their main religion in the early days, in Genghis Khan's days. And then they actually became Christian also in a very short amount of time when the gospel reached them as early as in the 14th century. And then we became part of China by means of course, and then we became Buddhist. So it's like, you can see from going to isms, like shamanism to Buddhism, and then we basically became communist in 1921 when we allied with the Russians. So that's kind of a history.
So you've already been dominated by both large powers on either side, right?
Well, we didn't have any choice because, we're situated between Russia and China, so we're kind of landlocked. We were communists for about 70 years under the Russian rule. And therefore, sometimes, we sort of struggle with our identity, whether we are an Asian country or a European country because of the Russian influence that we've had.
Right. I want to talk more about your country and about ministry that you do through radio, but I want to talk about your own story too, Bud. I'd like to hear how you became a Christian and just give me the details. This is fascinating to me.
Well, thank you. I mean, when the country first opened up in the year of 1990, actually, that's when the Iron Curtain fell, and democracy was first introduced into my country, and that's when actually
you were how old at the time?
I was actually 20 years old at that time.
Boy, you were right in the thick of it,
right
then,
in the
weren't
thick
you?
of it.
Wow,
exactly. So, and when the first missionaries could ever enter into my country was in 1991, and that's when the gospel came in, and the Bible, the New Testament was actually being translated at that time. And I was just a boy out of a high school, basically working for my ways to try to get into a medical school, because my parents told me that I should become a doctor, medical doctor.
So you lived in the city.
Yes, I did.
You weren't a part of the nomadic.
No, I wasn't. No, okay. I was born and raised in the city.
Okay.
And so then I was studying pretty hard to try to, toward the exam, and I actually couldn't enter the institute because of the competition was quite high.
Really?
And so then I met this lady from Great Britain who actually, whom I thought that, hey, it would be a great idea to learn some English, I might as well, And that's when I was actually introduced for the first time to an English language and also to the gospel. And she gave me the Bible in Russian language to read. And of course, when I first turned to the first pages of the book of Genesis, I kind of laughed to myself, this could be the greatest man-made, fictional story I've ever read, because we were all being influenced very much by atheism.
So you looked at it as a good story.
Yes, but then when I actually started reading the New Testament in the Mongolian language, it really made a lot of sense. Especially, it dealt with the fear that I've always had, because living in a communist country, fear is the main ruler. Growing up, you were very fearful, of living, even, fitting to live in that kind of a culture.
It really must have been a time of great openness. Minds were suddenly open to all kinds of possibilities. But you were led to a copy of the Scriptures.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. That has been an amazing part of it. With the democracy, with the freedom. Of course, as a provision. Now, as I see it, as a provision of God, of course, our democracy.
It led in all good things and all bad things at the same time.
Exactly. The choices are actually now all of a sudden become available. And so I started serving the first church ever established in Mongolia. And,
so you became a Christian.
And I became a Christian.
What was the tipping point for you, Bud? I mean, what finally convinced you this is true?
It is something that I fought, in my life. First of all, it was an issue of fear. The other one was the issue of meaning. What is the meaning of life? If you're just evolved from apes, and if you just live here for 60, 70 years and you die, and that's what happens. What's the point?
Yeah.
And so those are the two main things that really dealt, gospel had answered my question, that there is an eternity, and also there is love that is greater than fear.
Were you on this quest alone? Did you have other family members, other friends who were right there in step with you?
Along with my friends, yes. Our generation basically was very much gravitated toward the gospel because communism ideology basically in itself had collapsed.
Yeah.
People
you knew how empty that was.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so then we all of a sudden, we were so open. And that's how basically the Church of Mongolia was birthed, because of the young people hungry to know the truth and, the gospel which came with democracy. That had filled us, and that's basically was an answer.
Did you face any rejection by those around you, family or otherwise?
Well, one of the fortunate things was my parents really understood. My dad is still a part of the member of the old Communist Party. And at that time, of course, he was sort of like very afraid that I will get myself into trouble by believing in some foreign religion.
So you became a Christian, and you said you started working in a church?
Yes, that was the most exciting part.
It must have been a brand new church.
When we only had like 7 songs to sing to worship God. We only had the New Testament, to read, and it was just so exciting times. And we've had more missionaries than our local believers, But it was exciting times, and I actually, learned to lead the worship, with talent that I'd received from God. And
well, how are you trained in the Scriptures then?
It's reading and
so you're self-taught.
Having a Bible study, with missionaries, because in those days, of course, we had small cell groups. Things were still very kind of spooky in a way. Things may have actually gone either direction.
Yeah, you weren't
either
sure
the
what was permitted and what wasn't permitted.
Exactly. So we sort of had to kind of hide in homes and study. And those missionaries, the pioneer missionaries who had actually led us in the Word of God.
Well, that's exciting. What about the church now? What has happened to the church in these intervening years, and what's the state of the church now?
Well, theologically speaking, the church has actually now had passed through its pioneering stage. Now the Church of Mongolia is 600 strong. We have 100,000 believers estimated, in the country of Mongolia, countrywide estimates. And we are already started being involved in foreign missions.
Okay. And how did you get involved in radio then? When did that come into the picture?
Wow. Now you're really opening a box for me now. Because, when I was a little kid, my sister actually, took me by the hand, and she actually brought me over to the Mongolian state radio as a children's program anchor. And so I really actually became a radio person ever since I was 8. I was only working for the communist government.
Okay.
And when I actually became a Christian, that dream somehow, was kind of burst forth.
The radio seed was there.
Yeah, the seed was there.
Yeah.
And now when I became a Christian, I said, well, how wonderful it would be if I can actually use radio to tell people about the love of Jesus Christ, that there is God who cares for them. And so ever since I became a Christian in 1993, I think God has kind of rekindled the seed and the vision in my heart. And I've been praying that, we should start a radio program. And I've contacted actually various international Christian radio broadcasters.
You took the initiative.
Yes, I did. In 1995, I still remember vividly that I actually wrote letters to some major Christian broadcasters, and FEBC responded to my Macedonian call, if you will, to
kind
come
of in
and join
reverse,
us.
though.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And so, but it wasn't actually. It actually didn't. Wasn't fulfilled until the year of 2000.
We'll continue getting to know this young man, the manager of Radio Wind for FEBC in Mongolia. Stay tuned. Next time on First Person, the powerful story of a son being reconciled to his father.
There's all kinds of stuff that gets in between our relationships, but ultimately, God our Father is all our Father. And He set the example for me on how to love my own dad. And God blessed me because at the end of my life, my dad was able to come back and love me.
You'll meet Juan Ortiz on the special Father's Day weekend edition of First Person. My first-person guest today is...
Batjargal Tuvshintengel.
I've never had to ask a guest to give his own name before, but it's such a lovely name, and I'm going to work on that. I really am. But in the meantime, I have your permission to call you Bat. So welcome again to the program.
It's a privilege. Thank you, Wayne.
You are the director of FEBC, the Far East Broadcasting Company in Mongolia, and I'm so excited about what God is doing around the world with FEBC, and you're one of those young leaders who's stepping up, and you said that you wrote a letter to FEBC, and they responded.
That's right.
What were you asking, and what did they say?
Well, I kind of started asking them, we have in Mongolia such a freedom, religious freedom now, and the churches are on the rise. People need the gospel, especially in the countryside. Would you come and help us, first of all, to train us to how to do Christian radio, and secondly, to help establish a presence, some kind of presence.
Did you write that letter to the U.S. or to Korea, or where did you send that letter?
I actually wrote it to the U.S.
You did? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
And someone got that letter?
Someone got that letter, and he actually responded me by saying, it is a great possibility, but, when the season comes, that should have taken place.
So what were the first steps? What began to happen then?
Well, then I was actually attending a school here in the States, in a Bible college. And, at the same time, of course, I was always kind of crying out loud, basically, when's the radio ministry going to be?
You had this dream. You knew it was a God-given plan and dream, didn't you?
Yes. And actually, very interestingly, that, I kind of developed a relationship with FEBC over the years, on writings only. And one of their international presidents had actually come and see me while I was going to school in Midwest. And we got connected for the first time. Of course, we've been corresponding over the years, and him and I got together, and it's just amazing, Wayne, that just in 1 hour, we sat together and prayed about it. Somehow we just got connected in much deeper ways. And then we decided that we make a survey trip back to Mongolia with one of our engineers. And so we did. In a couple of months, since I met him, we went to Mongolia and we surveyed. And then we actually applied for a license for an FM band in the city of Ulaanbaatar, which then, of course, at that time, we only had about 3 radio stations in the city of Ulaanbaatar.
What was that process like to obtain a license? I mean, not too many people had done that before.
That's right.
So
Well,
who do you ask?
Well, it's I'd actually approached a parliament member to help us out. I just told him that first of all, we want to bring in a radio station that speaks to people's lives. We're not going to be just playing music. Music is good, but we want to go take it a little deeper than that. And I think that might have, triggered his desire to help us.
So from the time you applied to the time you're on the air, how much time had gone by?
It took exactly a year.
A simple year.
Exactly a year. Actually,
I mean, a year's a long time, but still, that's a lot of work to be done in 1 year.
Actually, it's very interesting that I was actually entering my senior year in college, and then somebody called me from Mongolia and says, "Hey, your license is now up. You've got only 3 months to start a radio station. So you better hurry."
What'd you do? Did you leave?
I did. Actually, I've had a lot of help, and both in prayer and resources from FEBC and also from a radio group from the Twin Cities, and they've really helped till the last minute. I actually just 21 days before the license was up, I really vividly remember, taking a break from my college, writing a letter saying, explaining why I had to leave the college, and then at the same time, 21 days, I had all the equipment, in 3 or 4 big, those, action packers,
Sure,
those things,
sure.
trunks, put them in there, and I brought them back to Mongolia, and just about 3 days before the preliminary license ran out, we were on the air.
You were probably the busiest college student I've ever. That's an amazing story.
I don't know. When I think back, yeah.
You put the radio station on the air. How long has it been on the air now?
Now it's been on the air since 2000, so it's been on the air 13 and a half years now.
And it reaches how many people in that country?
Well,
in that city?
Well, we have a 1.2 million population there, so the estimation is about 250,000 people.
This is an FM radio station.
It's an FM radio station.
What's the programming like?
The programming, it's evangelistic programming, and some of the programming are pre-evangelistic because, we're dealing with people who have no clue about, Christian faith.
Yeah, you said, 100,000 believers in the country.
That's right.
And so by the time you narrow that down to that one location, you've got a lot of non-believers who are your audience.
Why we are a Christian radio for non-Christians, basically.
And how do they respond? What do they say?
Well, we have been receiving very interesting responses. Some of them, of course, families are coming together. That's for one thing. A lot of men are actually being affected by alcoholism.
Yeah, I've heard that's a real
leaving their,
deep need there. Isn't it?
So gospel is basically replacing the addiction. So that's one thing that I can say very proudly that as a work of the Holy Spirit.
Personalize that for me. Tell me the story of a listener whose life has been touched.
There's a guy by the name of Gombo, and he actually used to sell idols, and he was basically an idol salesman, because of course in a country like Mongolia where everything kind of collapsed, people are searching, and they
making
want
a living.
exactly,
yeah.
And so but then his wife was an alcoholic. She was a cook, and she was an alcoholic because they had a very depressed life. And of course, now of course they realized that it was a bondage. Basically, they were under a bondage. And they were on the brink of divorce, because he just, he lost control of, how he can continue. And Gombo one day actually started listening to our radio in his car. And that's how he heard us talking about faith in Jesus Christ. And one of the pastors who was actually sharing the gospel on the radio was actually a former convict who actually became a Christian later. And he became a pastor, and he actually was our host for the program. And he talked about how we can be bondaged by our thoughts, our habits, and our, therefore they can become addictions.
Yeah.
And that's how Gombo actually came to faith. And then he actually shared, the gospel with his wife, and now his wife's been sober ever since. Basically, so it's a story of transformation. One
of many families whose lives have been changed.
That's right.
Of course, you as well as anyone knows the power of radio to reach out and to, be a safe thing. He listened in his car. He probably wouldn't have gone to a church, would he?
No.
And yet he listened in his car and heard the gospel.
That's right.
His life was changed.
That's right.
So tell me more about your work with the station, what you do personally, and about what some of the needs are there.
Well, I think one of my greatest passion and my strength is to encourage and empower, young leaders to do the work of the gospel, to serve the community in a holistic way. Because gospel is not only just about salvation; it's more than that. To how to live our lives on this earth, and it really matters to God. How to lead our families and raise our kids. And of course, the whole community is going through problems of such, divorce and abortions and, orphans and street kids and all those kinds of things. So not only just sharing the gospel, but also we are expressing the heart of God in all the programs that we do. So part of my ministry, basically, personally, is to, first of all, to develop people who can develop these contents.
Okay.
And then secondly, that I help them to develop these contents, basically give them the direction of, okay, now, because we need to also sense the trends in the society, where the greatest needs and where the greatest painful points are, so that we can respond to them as a radio station. And it has been very tangible, not only on the air, but also off the air, on the ground. We can mingle, meet, train, teach, and just fellowship with the communities.
So you do call-in programs?
Yes, most of our programs are actually call-in. It's all live programs. We have counselors sitting on the microphone, and they answer various types of questions relating to faith in Jesus Christ, health issues, relationship issues, and even some psychologies, for example, depression and stress and things like that, burnout, so that people can get a first-hand, like what we call a first aid programs. Yeah. So in other words, if we talk about in a hospital term, some of our programs are preventative. It's like a vaccine. You're giving people immunization shots so that they will not get in those kinds of problems. Yeah. Some of the programs are actually geared toward first aid. In other words, when people are hurt, when they're bleeding, you have to bind their bondages. So
very practical things you talk about.
And some of them things are actually even a post-surgery type of programs that you have to do a lot of follow-up by meeting them.
Bob, what is your vision as the Lord tarries? What is your vision for your country spiritually? And radio plays a big part in that. What would you like to see happen?
In number-wise, we want to see at least 10% of our population not only reached with the gospel of Jesus Christ, but discipled by the Lord Jesus Christ by the year of 2020. And that is the vision that our staff and our church friends are actually working toward in number-wise. Mm-hmm. But in quality-wise, we want to dig deeper. In other words, we want to make sure that the Word of God is applied, not only heard and taught, but applied in everyday life. And I want to see people practice their faith not only on Sundays, but throughout the week, and not only in their church, Christian, comfortable environments, but in the mission fields, because the mission field is not necessarily far away. The mission field is next door. So we want to make sure that is done. And I want to see my country being influenced by the Judeo-Christian ethics, the morals, and the values that we can set our course ahead so that our country can become a major contributor for foreign missions.
Bot's ministry, along with his staff in Mongolia, is amazing, and it is speeding the growth of the church in that country to God's glory. Radio Wind is part of the Far East Broadcasting Company with radio stations and associated ministries in many parts of Asia and beyond. Of course, we'll provide additional information about this station in Mongolia, along with general FEBC info on our webpage, firstpersoninterview.com. Follow the links we provide to learn how to specifically pray and support these radio ministries. That's firstpersoninterview.com. We also have a Facebook page where you can leave comments and additional questions for our guests. That's found at facebook.com/firstpersoninterview. If you haven't done so already, I hope you'll first like our page, as we say on Facebook, and then add your comments. Facebook.com/firstpersoninterview. And to download the podcast, go online to iTunes and search for First Person. Next week, a special Father's Day edition. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Thanks for listening to First Person.